Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Wednesday night class. This week is exciting because we are finishing the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. Not exciting that we're finished with it, but it's exciting to start a new Torah portion, a new book next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, with God's help. So this week we actually have a double Torah portion. We have Parashat Vayakhel and Pikudei, and I believe this week, yes, it is. This week is also Parashat HaChodesh. So we're going to have two Sefer Torahs out. We're going to read the first two Torah portions from the first Sefer Torah, Vayakhel and Pikudei, and then the next Torah portion of Parashat HaChodesh, where God gave the Jewish people the mitzvah, the very first mitzvah as a Jewish nation, as sanctifying the new month. Which was an amazing event. And we do that this week because it is right upcoming the month of Nisan, which is the first month that was given to the Jewish people. This is the fourth portion in the extra series of 4 Torah portions that are added before the holiday of Passover. So it's very nice. If you got the other 3, how nice is it to get this 4th one? If you missed any of the first 3, that's okay. You could still come and listen to this 4th one, Be'ezrat Hashem. So just as a little recap before we get into Reb Leib's Dvar Torah for this evening, which is, I think it's very, very nice. Thank God. We worked hard on finding it and preparing it, and we found a nice one. So as a recap for the last 5 Torah portions in the book of Exodus, we have Parashat Truma and Tetzaveh, which Truma speaks about the fundraising for the tabernacle and building directions, not the actual building itself, just the directions how to build it. The next Torah portion, Tetzaveh, speaks about fabricating Aaron's garments for his service, him and his children, and the upcoming high priests, Kohen Gadol. Then we had last week Parashat Ki Tisa, which speaks about collecting the half shekel, and then the infamous sin of the golden calf. And then this week we read the last 2 Torah portions of Vayakhel and Pikudei. Vayakhel speaks about the fundraising for the tabernacle along with the actual construction, and Pikudei is a summary and a put together and the actual setup of the Mishkan. So this is the synopsis of the last 5 Torah portions we have in the book of Exodus. This week, the Torah tells us that Bezalel, who was already introduced to us earlier in the Torah, who was only 13, he was the one who was chosen with divine prophecy to be the architect for the tabernacle, for the Mishkan. The Torah tells us that he made the ark. Okay, he made the ark. Let's take a look at the verse. If you look on your screen, we're in Exodus chapter 37, verse 1. It says, Vayas Bezalel et ha'aron atzei shitim. Bezalel made the ark of acacia wood, maybe it's acacia wood. Amatayim v'chetzi yarkov, ama v'chetzi yochov, ama v'chetzi chomato. 2.5 cubits long, a cubit and a half wide, and a cubit and a half high. So you see, it says very clearly at the beginning that Bezalel made the ark. Very nice. Now, Rashi asks the obvious question. He says, why is it that only the ark is mentioned, that the only item in the Mishkan that is mentioned that Bezalel made? Bezalel actually made all the utensils. Moshe Rabbeinu was mandating him how to do and what to do. Moshe Rabbeinu put everything together, but every single utensil Bezalel made. So Rashi wants to know, why is this the only utensil that Bezalel's name is mentioned to making? He made all of them. Why is this one the one that Bezalel made this one? Bezalel made everything. Rashi says, because Bezalel devoted himself to the construction and to the work of the construction of the Mishkan and putting together utensils more than any other of the volunteers, more than anyone else. The terminology he uses is that he was Moser Nefesh. Moser Nefesh means he self-devoted himself. It's almost like he sacrificed a part of himself in order to do this. He was so involved and committed to making this Mishkan. So because of that, Rashi says his name is mentioned with the construction of the ark. That's what Rashi says. Reb Leib has two very important questions, obvious questions. Question number one, where does or how does Rashi know that Bezalel was the one who devoted himself more than anyone else? That's question number one. It's a nice thought, but why him more than anyone else? Second is Rashi isn't answering specifically why Bezalel's name is associated with the ark. He still didn't answer his question. His question is, why is Bezalel's name mentioned with the ark? He answers, because he devoted himself to the construction more than anything else. That's the construction in general. That's all the utensils. That wasn't the ark. So because of this, Reb Leib tells us a fascinating concept. And he says, and there's a practical lesson at the end, so hold in for this. Reb Leib says Rashi must be referring to what it says in the Talmud, Masechet Brachot, page 55, that tells us that when Moshe directed Bezalel to build the Mishkan and all of its utensils, he did so out of order. Moshe told Bezalel to make the ark, the utensils, and the tabernacle. Bezalel questioned, he argued, he confronted Moshe Rabbeinu, and he said, there's no way God commanded you to do it in that order. Rather, it must be you first make the tabernacle and then the ark and utensils. Pause for a moment. That's what the Talmud says. Reb Leib says pause. He says, do we understand what it means? Do we appreciate what it takes to confront Moshe Rabbeinu? Chazal tell us, our sages teach us, that it was literally misirut nefesh. Again, that same word we used before, that self-devotion, self-sacrifice, complete vulnerability to confront Moshe Rabbeinu. How do we know this? Because in Parashat Bishalach, we didn't read it too long ago, after the Jewish people cross the sea and are saved with the water crashing down on the Egyptians, what happens at that moment? The men break out in song, in a prophetic song, Shirat Hayam Az Yashir Moshe. Miriam then gets up and leads the women in their song and dance. Do we remember this? This is beautiful. Look at what the Torah says. Look how the Torah refers. Exodus chapter 15, verse 20. Vatikach Miriam haneviyah, and Miriam the prophetess, Ahot Aharon et hatof beyada. Aaron's sister took a timbrel in her hand. And all the other women came out with their instruments and dances. 1 second. Asks Rashi, why is Miriam referred to as Aaron's sister? Is she not Moshe's sister also? I mean, it would be perfect. Az Yashir Moshe, and now Moshe's sister comes along and also leads a women's song and dance. Rashi asks, why is she referred to Aaron's sister? Rashi answers, because Aaron risked his life. He was literally, again, Moser Nefesh. He devoted himself. He put himself on the line. When Miriam got leprosy, when Miriam speaks to Aaron at the end of Parashat Behalotcha is in the book of Numbers. When Miriam speaks to Aaron about Moshe's wife, she was punished with leprosy for speaking Lashon Hara. What happens at that moment? Aaron confronts Moshe Rabbeinu and tells him, pray for her refuah, pray for her recovery, because if anyone could, you'd be the only one that can get it done. Reb Leib says we learn from this episode of Miriam that confronting Moshe Rabbeinu is a mesirut nefesh. It's a self-devotion, it's a self-sacrifice to confront Moshe Rabbeinu. It takes a lot of a person to question the authority of the one who's transferring the divinity to us, the one who's transferring the Torah to us. Of course, he's a human being. Of course, he's not perfect. But to muster up the will, the guts to question, That is something very, very difficult. So if Aaron, who was requested, Reb Leib says, if Aaron was requesting something for his sister from Moshe Rabbeinu, if that's considered self-devotion, what can we say about Betzalel, a 13-year-old boy confronting an 80-year-old man? Betzalel's questioning Moshe's very own understanding of what Hashem told him. Who are you to question the prophet? You're 13 years old, you little pipsqueak. You know what it took? He says, the way you're saying it can't be the way Hashem said because it doesn't make sense when it comes to the building of the Mishkan. What? Who are you? Betzalel was challenging the authenticity of Moshe's report and command from God. To Betzalel, there was no way that Hashem would have said, make the utensils in the ark, the holiest item in the entire tabernacle. Now, once they're made, let them wait. Let them just sit out in the open, nowhere for them to be housed. They didn't have pods where you could just stick it into a pod and, in the interim till you got to get it into the place you got to get it into. It's also that makes no sense. First, you build the structure, the Mishkan, and then once it's ready, you build the utensil so that the utensil goes straight into there. This is why Reb Leib says the Torah calls the making of the ark in Betzalel's name. This explains what Rashi meant by saying, Shenatan nafsho ala melacha. He gave his soul, he devoted himself to the construction and to the work more than anyone else. So to answer our first question, Betzalel was the only one who confronted Moshe Rabbeinu of the order of making the Mishkan before the ark and the other utensils. That takes true Mesirut Nefesh to stand up to Moshe Rabbeinu, obviously in a respectful way, but that's why he was the only one mentioned. Oh, and the second question, why is it specifically mentioned by the ark? It's because it was for the sake and the honor of the ark that that Betzalel got up and stood up and questioned Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why it's mentioned by the ark. It's a beautiful concept. And the lesson that comes from this is that it takes guts. It takes the involvement, the investments of one's soul to stand up for what's right. It's not easy. You really think you're convinced? You really think you got this? It's hard to get up and express that, especially when you're confronting your teacher or your parent or a senior or someone famous. But Betzalel did this. He did it with respect. And we see that doing it with respect, not only was he right, it would have been okay if he was wrong, it's okay. But he was right, and he was rewarded and praised and mentioned extra for that. Getting up and expressing what you think is hard. That's real Mesirut Nefesh, self-devotion. So a thought I want to leave you with is, when someone else does that, someone else gets up and confronts you, hopefully in a respectful way, questions you, asks you, before knocking them down, before crushing them, before clipping them from under their feet, maybe give them credit or the credit they deserve for standing up. It's a thought I had. Today I was thinking about it. I said, they could be completely wrong. But before you crush them and you crush their idea, can you validate them? Validate. You don't lose anything from validating them. It adds towards the exercise of education. It's so easy to, if you already have the answer, say, no, wrong, boom, ding, 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 ding. No, that's not that. You know what it took for that person to ask the question, to pose the question? So give them the credit for doing that, because that's the only way they'll be able to learn, and we'll be able to learn all together. So may Hashem bless us that we will realize what it takes to question. You have to understand, my Rebbe says this all the time, that our faith, Rav Yitzchak Berkowitz, may Hashem bless him with a long and healthy life, amen. Rav Yitzchak Berkowitz tells us that our religion is based on questioning. That's our entire existence, our entire Torah education. We question not for the sake of questioning or for the sake of knocking. We question for the sake of understanding, of delving deeper, of trying to make things meaningful and make sense to us. At the end of the day, we know that the end goal is we do, whether we like it or not, whether we understand it or not, because we're commanded to by Hashem. But that whole back and forth and give and take of questioning in order to understand is part of Torah. It's part of Judaism. And with this, I'll end off with what he says, that this is call it the engine of our Passover Seder. The engine of our Passover Seder, which is coming up in, I believe it's in 3 weeks from now. The engine of our Passover Seder is questions. Why are we so obsessed with questions on Passover? Because number one, questions is what engages the children and grandchildren, which is the most important part of our Passover Seder. And this leads us into the second point, is that through questioning our Torah, through questioning our sages for the sake of learning, that is how Torah was always transmitted from generation to generation. If you want to transmit something onto your children, it's don't live the status quo. Don't just follow like sheep and herds. No, of course we're doing the right thing. We're not talking about someone going completely wackadoodle and off the path. No, but to question, to understand, to question, to learn. That is the value of our religion. So we make that the engine, the V12 of our Passover Seder. So may Hashem bless us that we will always have the courage to stand up for what's right, as hard as it may be, and the courage to question for the sake of learning. And hopefully that those questions will be springboards into getting answers which will help us learn more, observe more, understand more, and connect to Hashem more. Amen. Amen.